So we're going to do a few more completing the square. This time we're going to get a few that don't come out nicely, or they're not too neat, they're fractions, okay? So leave the number that completes the square as a fraction when that happens, all right? And then again, we're going to write it in factored form. So those steps again, to complete the square, you chop the -10 in half, so that's -5, then square that value. Notice I added parentheses because we are not only squaring the 5, but the negative sign also. So -5 squared is 25. And then for the factored form, and since we are completing a square, we know this is one binomial, one expression squared. It's x and then half of the middle term, minus 5, the coefficient of the middle term. Okay, divide the 12 in half, that's 6. Square it is 36. Factored form would be x, and half of 12 is positive 6. All right, here's our first one that's a fraction. When we chop 15 in half, it's 7 1/2. So we're going to leave that 15 halves. And then we're going to square it. 15 squared is 225, and 2 squared is 4. So we're going to write this as 225 over 4. Now, factored form will also contain a fraction. X plus half of 15 was 15 halves. Okay, number 4, chop 18 in half, that's 9. Square it is 81. So factored form would be x, and then half of the positive 18 is positive 9. Here's another one. Last two will both come out as fractions. So we chop -11 in half, and that's -5 1/2. So we'll just leave it as is, -11 halves. Square it, everything including the negative sign. So that's -11 squared is positive 121. 2 squared is 4. So 121 over 4. For factored form, x, now half of -11, we already said, was -11 over 2. All right, and number 6. Now this time we want to take half of -1/2. So -1/2 divided by 2. So remember, when we divide fractions, that's really, this is dividing by 2 over 1. So we're going to make that -1/2 times the reciprocal 1 over 2. So that's -1/4. So half of -1/2 is -1/4. We want to square that. So -1 squared is 1, 4 squared is 16. So 1/16. In factored form, x, and then again, the half of -1/2 was -1/4. All right, this time we have a perfect square expression, but we are missing the middle term, the b term. So we have to do all that in reverse. So if we know that we squared something to get this last term, what was squared to get 16? So we're saying, what's the square root of 16? Well, that's 4. But remember, that wasn't the b term, that was half of the b term. So then that answer times 2 gives us 8. Right? Because the ones we did above, we chopped this number in half, half of 8 was 4, and squared it for 16. Factored form is x plus half of 8 is 4 squared. Now, square root of 16, there are actually two numbers, both a positive 4 and a negative 4. The reason I used positive 4 was because this sign was already positive. In number 8, that sign is negative, so when I start by taking the square root of 121, this time I know I want it to be -11. Okay, but again, that was half of the number, so I'm going to multiply that by 2 and go, I know I need -22 in there. My factored form would be x, half of -22 is -11 squared. Okay, square root of 625, again, I want the negative one. So square root of 625 is 25, I want the -25. Double that, so it's negative 50. We're going to write in that blank. The factored form would be x, and then it's half of negative 50 is negative 25. Okay, square root of 9, I want the positive one since the sign is positive. Square root of 9 is 3, double that is 6. For factored form, x, half of positive 6 is positive 3. Okay, now these last two are a little bit different because of the number we have in front. Okay, we have an a value, a coefficient of the x squared. So that's going to change everything. We're going to need to take the square root of both of these. So the square root of 25 is 5, and the square root of 49 is 7. Multiply those together. 5 times 7 is 35, and then double that is 70. So this is actually a positive 70. Okay? Then when we take the factored form, we have to use the square root of 25x squared as 5x, and the square root of 49 positive 7. Again, I know that's positive because this sign up here was positive. And if we were checking, it's 5 times 7 is 35x. 5x times 7 is 35x. Double that is 70x. Okay. So over here again, square root of 9 is 3. Square root of 225 is 15. 3 times 15 is 45. And double that gives us 90 for the middle coefficient. So in factored form, square root of 9x squared is 3x. The square root of 225 is 15. And then because this middle sign is positive, we need a plus in there. Okay. So number 11 and number 12 were definitely challenge problems. Hopefully you at least understand that after the fact, even if you struggled figuring them out on your own. Oh, and here we got another one. 13, same thing. So we're going to do square root of 4 is 2, and square root of 9 is 3. So multiply 2 times 3 gives me 6, and then double that, I want 12 for that middle coefficient. Factored form, square root of 4x squared is 2x, square root of 9 is 3, and because that middle sign is positive, a plus sign. All right, square root of 64 is 8. I want positive 8 because this is positive. Double that is 16. Back to factored form the easy way. Square root of x squared is x. Square root of 64 is 8. Positive because of the plus sign. All right, now we have a fraction out here, but taking the square root of a fraction is just as simple as taking the square root of the numerator and then putting it over the square root of the denominator. So square root of 9 is 3, square root of 4 is 2. Double that, well, 3 halves times 2 over 1 is 6 over 2, or just 3. So on that blank, we want a 3. For factored form, x, and then the 3 halves, remember the half of the middle term, positive, because that's positive.